The car that pretty much started Japanese drift culture. It pretty much invented drift tax. We're talking about the S chassis, or the 240SX, or the 180SX, or the 200SX, or the S13, or the S14, whatever you want to call it. You've probably heard of the Nissan S chassis because they were lightweight, unlike your sister. They were great handling cars. They were super easy to drift. They had a huge aftermarket, and people loved them. But now they're not so cheap, but they're still good at all the other things. The first generation S chassis, also known as the S10, came out in 1975. It was intended to be Nissan's cheap rear-wheel drive sports platform with the price of the Z car going up every year. It came with a 1.8 liter everywhere else in the world, but in the States, we got the 2.0 liter, which is why they called it the 200SX. This car didn't do that great in every market because of the Toyota Celica and most people opting for that car instead of the S10. In 1979, the S110 came out, which is the second generation. In North America, it was still called the 200SX. You could get the S110 in a 2-door coupe or a 3-door hatchback. Made a huge 100 horsepower, big numbers. The S110 also had a rally version called the 240 RS. It was a real sports car, a real rally car, and it finished second in one rally in 1983. Then the S12 came out, and this is where the Nissan sports car got some sports put into it. Got a couple of soccer balls in there. The S12 came out in 1983, still called the 200SX in North America. The coupe came with a 2-liter single overhead cam engine. The hatchback came with that engine, or it came with a 1.8-liter turbocharged engine, even in North America, which is the only turbo S chassis North America ever got. So that's something. In 1987, the turbo engine was replaced with the SE trim level, which came with a V6, making 160 horsepower. Then in 1988, the car that would forever cement the S chassis into history, into the books, made a car that people actually wanted, the S13. In 1988, the S13 came out, and in North America, it was now called the 240SX. The 240SX saw some upgrades like multi-link rear suspension and a limited slip differential in some models. Now, when I say these upgrades, Nissan likes to do this thing where they have a billion different trim models. So you could get them with that stuff or without it or with some of it. Like, they have a bajillion options that you could get. So not every car will have the multi-link and the LSD. In North America, we got a 140 horsepower KA24 engine, which eventually got updated to a dual overhead cam, making 155 horsepower. Now, the biggest flaw in the American version, or the North American version, is the engine. In Japan, they got the SR20 DET, which, if you don't know that engine, you should. It's the 2JZ of 4 cylinders. Believe it or not, you could get a convertible. Only 600 were ever made of the S13, and they all came in an automatic transmission. But they exist. The S13 is pretty much single-handedly responsible for drift culture being so mainstream, especially in Japan, where they were super cheap. In 1994, the S14 came out, and in North America, it came with the same KA24E dual overhead cam engine, making 155 horsepower. In the S14, you could only get the coupe with the hatchback being discontinued. It came with a stiffer chassis, and, well, we lost something that, for some reason, car manufacturers think we can live without, but we cannot. Cup holders. No cup holders in S14s, just so you know. The car, with its stiffened chassis, also gained 80 pounds, just like your mom over December. 97 saw a facelift with new headlights, bumpers, hood, fenders, and taillights. In 1998, the last S chassis was sold in the United States. They were still available overseas, but you can no longer buy an S chassis in the USA. Japan got a cool version of the S14 called the 270R. They only made it in 1994, and hence the name. It made 270 horsepower. Came with a heavy-duty clutch, a limited slip differential, Nismo body kit, and only 30 were ever made, so they're rare, and they're very expensive now. The last generation of the S chassis, the S15, was only available in Japan, Australia, or New Zealand. So if you didn't live there, you were SOL, sorry. The S15 would only last a short 3 years, but short is a relative term, and for some people, 45 seconds is a long time. Most people consider this the best looking S chassis by far, and I agree. The S15 came with 247 horsepower out of the SR20 DET, and you could get a naturally aspirated SR20 making 163 horsepower. The S15 had much more aggressive styling compared to the S14 and even the S13. You could get a Spec R with a 6-speed manual, stiffer chassis, better bracing, better brakes, and a helical LSD. The 200SX/S chassis/240SX S13, S14 became legendary as a drift car. But not only that, they were great motorsports cars too. Even the earlier ones that weren't considered to be all that well handling still made their way way onto the racetrack. And they were exactly what Nissan set out for them to be. They were a cheap, sporty, rear-wheel drive car that enthusiasts and people who wanted to start drifting could get into under $1,000 back in the day. Now, for an S13 shell that's 30 years old, it costs $10,000 with no engine or transmission and probably some rust. So now every S chassis was pretty small and cramped inside. I wouldn't say cramped, I would say more of a sports car, and people like your mom wouldn't be able to fit in. This car pretty much invented the word drift tax. You've seen these cars go all the way from $1,000 for a clean, running, driving, stock example. To find one of those nowadays is probably 15 grand, just because they're so good at drifting and they made parts for them and things like that. But not all hope is lost. Prices are starting to come back down, so it's almost reasonable to get into one again. Almost, not quite. So if you have an S chassis that you're selling, don't list it for 15 grand, please. Do us a favor. That's all I've got for today. Maybe you're more interested in front wheel drive for some reason. Maybe you like Carroll Shelby, American cars. Check out this video about the Shelby Charger. That was interesting, to say the least. Make sure you like and subscribe if you do enjoy and want to see more. And other than that, I'll see you next time. We're talking about more cars, probably. That's what we do around here. Later. Oh, Lord.